This is Diana Lovejoy. When Greg Mulvihill met and married the then love of his life, Diana Lovejoy, he had no clue that his wife would try to shoot him several years down the line. But she did.
I'm Diana Lovejoy, and quick meals are my specialty. I know that you don't have all day. We've got mouths to feed.
Things had gone awry between the lovebirds as years passed, and Diana kept having miscarriage after miscarriage. 8 different times in total. And when they finally had their baby, it was obvious to the couple that whatever they had between them in the beginning was lost. And so in 2014, they filed for a divorce. The entire process dragged on for 2 years, but eventually it happened, and Diana got custody. For some reason, though, this wasn't enough for Diana, and she decided to take things to the next level by murdering her now ex-husband. Luckily for both of them, Diana was a bad shot and missed Greg's heart narrowly. This made the court order Diana to share custody of their son and contribute a monthly sum of $100 towards the child's support. However, Diana wasn't having any of it, so she enlisted the help of her gun instructor and ex-Marine Weldon McDavid Jr. to finish the job that she botched. But either Greg was just that guy with 9 lives, or we know now why Diana was a bad shot, because McDavid botched the job again, hitting Greg in the armpit rather than the heart. And when the case got to court, the judge found both Lovejoy and McDavid guilty of attempted murder. Diana was given a sentence of 26 to life, while McDavid got slammed with 56 years imprisonment. Upon hearing the verdict,
Find the defendant, Diana Jean Lovejoy, guilty.
Diana Lovejoy gave out a cry and fainted shortly afterward. She had to be rushed out of the courtroom in an ambulance to receive medical attention. But, of course, her sentence waited for her on the other side of the ER doors. This is Esteban Carpio. On April 17th of 2005, 27-year-old Esteban Carpio was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of a policeman. Carpio's story is pretty chilling. Apparently, he had stabbed the geriatric woman by the name Madeline Gatta. The Providence police then brought him in for questioning following the incident. And in the process of questioning Carpio, one of the detectives stepped out of the room to get Carpio some water. Carpio, convinced that the time to set himself free was now or never, he quickly grabbed the gun of the other detective with him and shot the detective twice with it. The shots killed the policeman instantly as Carpio jumped through the window and made a run for it. Unfortunately for him, he didn't get very far before he was apprehended about 45 minutes later. Carpio's appearance during his trial was quite baffling and worrying. The offender's entire face was swollen, including his eyes, cheeks, forehead, and his entire cranial region. He also had on a mask, designed to keep him from biting people or spitting at them. On June 27, 2006, when Carpio was finally sentenced to life in prison without parole, his reaction wasn't anywhere near as dramatic as that of his family, who jumped and screamed about police brutality. Step off. Sure enough, an investigation was made into Carpio's injuries, and the FBI discovered that Carpio sustained them when he jumped from the 3rd floor of the building in which he was questioned. Carpio also struggled with law enforcement while getting arrested, which led to police using force. However, the evidence presented suggested that the force wasn't excessive considering the situation. Carpio was sentenced for both Madeline Gatta's stabbing and the murder of Detective Allen, and his insanity defense was rejected. These are Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari, a married couple and a devout religious farmers in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari were parents to a beautiful 10-month-old daughter they called Mary. But as far as Welch was concerned, Mary was little more than an inconvenience. As Welch watched this baby girl grow, he became convinced that she would be too weak to help out on the farm, and so implementing Darwin's law of natural selection, he decided to starve the child to death. The autopsy report revealed that Mary weighed 8 pounds at the time of her death, the same weight as a newborn, revealing that Mary was severely malnourished and starved. In fact, the baby had been left to herself for at least 19 hours before she was found dead in her moldy crib. When Welch eventually found out that his daughter was dead, he waited a full hour and a half before finally reaching out to 911. In light of all this, one has to wonder where the mother of the child was when her child was being severely neglected. Well, Fusari claimed that her husband abused and threatened her, and this made her ill-equipped to protect her daughter. Regardless, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse. The couple were both sentenced to life without parole. As the convictions were being read, you could see the look in their eyes, especially those of Welch.
Both charged with what they call felony murder, while in the perpetration or attempted perpetration of child abuse in the first degree, they're alleging that you murdered one Mary Welch,
who seemed to believe it was an unfair judgment. Welch had been reported as saying that he was treated unfairly because of his beliefs and his agnosticism towards modern medicine. Disgusting, man. While Fusari just shook her head and cried, Welch's jaw practically dropped in utter disbelief. What an idiot. He obviously could not believe how starving and neglecting your own child to the point of death could be considered felony murder. This is Jacob Matthew Morgan, and his story is a little less cut and dry than the others we've seen so far. Jacob Matthew Morgan was almost 16 years old when he got a baby brother, Joshua Hill. According to Morgan's mother, all he ever wanted was a baby brother, and he loved little Joshua to a fault.
This is also a kid who clearly loved the little brother.
That should have been all about this story, except on a certain day, Morgan set his house on fire with his much-beloved brother inside, watching the 14-month-old burn to death and doing nothing about it. Matt Morgan's parents are adamant that he couldn't have done this on purpose and that this was a mistake. Morgan's behavior in the courtroom also somewhat lends credence to his parents' position. However, when we go back to Morgan's statements to the police, it paints a totally different and yet confusing picture. According to police, Morgan gave many conflicting statements about how the fire started. He started out by saying that he mistakenly tossed a pillow too close to a heater. Then he said that he set a pillow on fire and he threw it in the air. However, he ultimately confessed that he started the fire, and evidence corroborated that statement. According to investigators' reports, the fire patterns at the Hills home showed that 2 fires were set, which showed intentionality. Plus, Morgan didn't try to call for help all the while the house burned down, knowing full well that his baby brother was in there. To be fair, Morgan had been diagnosed with developmental issues, being unable to read or write properly at age 17. His seeming devastation at the death of his brother also led to a division among the jury, who seemed to have a hard time deciding if Morgan was truly remorseful or just faking it. Initially, Morgan was charged with homicide through child abuse. However, in a plea deal, the sentence was exchanged for 15 years in prison. This is Ricky Hand, a Springfield, Ohio native accused of multiple armed robberies. So far, the reactions we have seen could be categorized as insane, but Ricky Hand's reaction crosses the line of insane to extremely insane. After hearing the case and considering the evidence, the judge in Hand's case sentenced him to 40 years in prison.
Did you just give me 40 years, sir? Yes.
At the time, Hand was 46 years old. Hence, the sentence could be considered as good as a life sentence. Hand had been linked to about 30 armed robberies in total, which he attributed to his involvement with hard drugs. But upon his sentencing, the strangest, most bizarre thing ever recorded in a courtroom happened. Hand reached into his hand sling and began to haul pill bottles at the judge and members of the courtroom. The bottles didn't hold pills, though. Actually, the bottles held his urine and his feces. Apparently, Hand had been storing these samples in pill bottles, and he anticipated the day he would be brought before the judge. And on the day of his arraignment, the defendant smuggled the samples into the courtroom by hiding them in his pants. According to Clark County Sheriff Gene Kelly, Hand should have been checked before being allowed to see the judge. However, for some reason, the officials didn't follow due process, and Hand was able to make his way into the courtroom with bottles of feces and urine that he confessed to have stored up for weeks. As he began to fling the bottles, the liquids hit his own lawyer among 4 other deputies. But Hand was eventually tackled and restrained by security officials, who most definitely also had to get liquids on themselves. A bad day for their line of work.